Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the approval of the House Journal for the 71st day, Thursday, May 16, 2019. I ask for a roll call vote.
The gentleman from Jefferson has moved for the approval of the House Journal for the 71st day, Thursday, May 16, 2019, and requested a roll call vote. Are there any additions or corrections, Journal? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the House Journal for the 71st day, Thursday, May 16, 2019, will vote yes. Those opposed will vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Gentleman from St. Louis County.
For a brief introduction of a special guest and a thank you.
Proceed.
Thank you. I just want to take a brief moment here and thank a man who I would not be able to do my job without this year. Recognize him for the hard work that he's done. Not only is he intelligent, he's extremely talented in his job, being diligent, but most importantly, he has strength of character and integrity, which are incredibly important in this line of work. My LA, Taylor Gibbs, is over on your right and my left here. I want to recognize him, ask the body to thank him for all his hard work. He's going to work for Congressman Luke DeMeyer, so it's been an honor to mentor him and look forward to all the good work that he's going to do here in the future. Thank you, Taylor.
Further introductions, lady from Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Introduction of special guests, please.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To my right and your left, I want to take the opportunity to introduce the caucus interns that we've had this year. Chelsea, Chris, and Casey have been a huge asset to the entire team. I have learned so much from them. They are huge inspirations to me, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank them for everything. Chelsea just graduated from Missouri Southern University with a 4.0 GPA in her bachelor's in social work. Casey just graduated from Truman State with a bachelor's of science in political science. Kyle has landed in DC internship working for National Association of Education of Young Children, and he'll be graduating from Truman in May of 2020. These three young people are absolutely amazing. Oh, I said Casey. I'm sorry. Chris Casey. I'm sorry I said that, Chris. These three young people have been amazing and such an honor to work with and learn from. And I just wanted to have the body thank them and wish them the best of luck in all that they do.
Further introductions, lady from Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Introduction of special guests.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To my left and to your right, I would like everyone to meet my intern, Tyler Gray. Tyler is the son of Virginia and Michael Gray. He's from Joplin and a freshman this year at Mizzou. Darius and I have been so blessed to have him. He's helped with research, legislative aid duty, constituent services. He's really jumped in. He maintains an impressive 3.9 4.0 GPA, belongs to the Mizzou Running Club and Pi Sigma Epsilon, and he also has already landed an internship with Congressman Billy Long this summer in Joplin. And so I couldn't be more proud of this young man and probably expect to see him on this floor someday. So please, Mr. Speaker, if the body would make him feel welcome and thank him for his work.
Has everyone voted? Ms. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote, 125 yes and 11 no, you approve the House Journal for the 71st day, Thursday, May 16, 2019. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The next order of business will be introduction of special guests.
Introduction of special guest, lady from Montauk.
Introduction of special guest, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To your right and to my left, sitting on the bench in the side gallery, is my amazing legislative assistant, June Cardwell, and our part-time assistant, Carson Kilday. The two of them have worked incredibly for the 48th and 50th district, and they've just sacrificed long hours and so much work, and they just have the greatest, utmost integrity for our district and such just servants' hearts. So I just wanted the body to thank them for their service to Missouri.
Gentleman from Worth, what purpose to your eyes?
Introduction of special guests.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to have some very special people with me this morning. As most of you know, to your right and to my immediate left, most of you know my beautiful wife, Robin. It's always great to have her with me, as well as our daughter, Kristen. Many of you remember Kristen as wonderful young lady who was always here during the MUOT day in the Capitol. She flew in from San Diego yesterday to be here the last day of session and also to graduate with her master's degree from MU in occupational therapy. So it's great to have her with us, as well as our youngest son, Luke. He is a very talented musician in Nashville. He's quickly climbed up the ranks, and he's played with a lot of bands, worked with a lot of bands such as Brett Eldridge, Sugarland, Terry Clark, Third Day for King and Country, and he's currently playing with a band called Ledger. They crisscross the country, playing in front of thousands of people in arena shows all over the nation and Canada. And honored to have another incredible musician with us today, Dove Awards nominee Ty Brassel, who, like Luke, crisscrosses this country multiple times and performs in front of thousands of people. And Ty is breaking boundaries with hip-hop by making great music with a message of hope. And I'm just very honored to have them with us. You know, these three have experienced more success in their life than I have in 52 years. But the greatest thing that I appreciate about them is they're just awesome young people. They have hearts for people and a compassion to take care of others. So join with me in welcoming them to the Capitol.
Welcome to the Capitol. Lady from Laclede.
Introduction of special guest.
Proceed, lady.
In the upper gallery, I have two great friends, Diane and Russell Brandstatter, and they're awesome card players too. Can you welcome my constituents, please?
Further introductions, lady from St. Charles.
Introduction of special guest.
Proceed, lady.
On my left and your right, between these columns over here, is my husband and also intern at our house sometimes. And I'd like to welcome him to the Capitol today. And I know that some of us have met him over the years, but he did want to join us today on our last day here in the Capitol. So if we could give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Further introductions. Seeing none. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next order of business. Be reports from committee.
Mr. Clerk, please read the reports from committees.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Fiscal Review, to its referred Senate Committee Substitute, House Committee Substitute, House Bills 243 and 544, begs to leave to report, examine the same, and recommends that it do pass. Mr. Speaker, Committee on Fiscal Review, to its referred Senate Substitute, House Committee Substitute, House Bill 1088, as amended, begs leave to report, examine the same, and recommends that it do pass. Mr. Speaker, Committee on Fiscal Review, to its referred Conference Committee report, Senate Substitute, Senate Committee Substitute, House Committee Substitute, House Bill 399, as amended, begs leave to report, to examine the same, and recommends that it do pass. Mr. Speaker, Committee on Fiscal Review, to its referred Conference Committee Report Number 2, House Committee Substitute, Senate Committee Substitute, Senate Bill 147, as amended, begs leave to report, examine the same, and recommends that it do pass. And Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Fiscal Review, to which was returned Conference Committee Report, Senate Substitute, House Committee Substitute Number 2, House Bill 499, begs leave to report, examine the same, and recommends that it do pass.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The next order of business will be bills in conference, and I ask you to recognize the gentleman from Franklin for a motion. Conference Committee Report, Senate Substitute, House Committee Substitute Number 2, House Bill 499.
Gentleman from Franklin, for purpose of your eyes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Conference Committee Report on Senate Substitute for House Committee Substitute Number 2 for House Bill 499 be adopted.
The gentleman from Franklin. Hold on, gentlemen. Let me get some order here. Members and guests, please keep your conversations to a whisper or take them outside. The gentleman from Franklin has moved for the adoption of Conference Committee Report for Senate Substitute for House Committee Substitute Number 2 for House Bill 499. Gentleman from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the body remembers, the underlying bill simply allows the Department of Revenue to withhold someone's driver's license if they strike either a highway worker in a clearly marked work zone or an emergency responder in an emergency zone. There were also some amendments added on in the Senate, including some highway renaming bills, and also there's the driver's license fee added in there as well. And then in conference committee, we did take out the language of the state being allowed to not participate in the emissions program, which saved the state a significant amount of money. With that, Mr. Speaker, if there's no further questions, I renew my motion.
Gentleman from St. Louis City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire briefly of the bill handler.
Proceed.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, gentlemen. Most of these came through our Transportation Committee. It's been a pleasure serving with you on that committee. I think it's a very, very fine committee. The point that you and I know in particular, were talking about that was problematic, the Senate wanted to add...
They wanted to add the exclusion of the state participating in the federal emissions program.
And so that's been removed.
That has been, yes, it has been stripped out and agreed upon by the Senate.
And we talked about it. It was important because we risked losing potentially
hundreds
of millions of dollars.
Yes.
Thanks for getting that done. That's good work by that committee, and I really appreciate you handling this bill.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the previous question.
Gentleman from Jefferson has moved the question under immediate consideration. Be now put. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 90 yes, 35 no, you approve the previous question. Gentleman Franklin, you have 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Conference Committee substitute for Senate substitute for House Committee substitute number 2 for House Bill.
Gentlemen, we still need to adopt the conference report.
Gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, I move that the Conference Committee report be adopted.
The gentleman from Franklin has moved that for the adoption of Conference Committee report for Senate substitute for House Committee substitute number 2 for House Bill 499. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Gentleman from St. Louis County.
Point of personal privilege.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, May has been set aside as Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Awareness Month. Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, or EDS, is a genetic disorder affecting collagen production in 1 out of 5,000 people worldwide, and at least 120,000 Missourians are affected, including my part-time legislative assistant, Chris Walker, who is to my left and your right, Mr. Speaker. Collagen is the glue that holds our bodies together, and those with EDS have frequent joint dislocations as well as vision, circulatory, nervous system, and organ problems. Many of them have to use canes and wheelchairs to aid their mobility and braces to keep them from injury in their sleep. As of today, there's no cure or treatment for EDS, and patients must seek out a team of specialists to address their many health issues. Children with EDS are frequently dismissed as flexible or told that they have growing pains, and the average diagnosis takes 28 years. It's the hope of the EDS Society that bringing attention to this connective tissue disorder will improve diagnosis and treatment, and I just want to thank Chris for all of her advocacy work on this issue and for fighting for people like her who suffer from this syndrome. And Mr. Speaker, I just urge the body to thank her for all her work and to remember all of those with EDS. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 140 yes and 5 no, you adopted Conference Committee report for Senate substitute for House Committee substitute number 2 for House Bill 499. Gentleman from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now I move that Conference Committee substitute for Senate substitute for House Committee substitute number 2 for House Bill 499 be third read and passed.
The gentleman from Franklin has moved for that Conference Committee substitute for Senate substitute for House Committee substitute number 2 for House Bill 499 be read the third time and passed. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 135 yes and 4 no, you have third read and passed Conference Committee substitute for Senate substitute for House Committee substitute number 2 for House Bill 499. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Mr. Speaker, remaining on the calendar, I ask you to recognize the gentleman from Boone for a motion on conference committee report, Senate substitute, Senate committee substitute, House committee substitute, House Bill 399.
Gentleman from Boone, for what purpose your eyes?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that conference committee report for Senate substitute, for Senate committee substitute, for House committee substitute, for House Bill 399 as amended be adopted.
The gentleman from Boone has moved the adoption of conference committee report for Senate substitute, for Senate committee substitute, for House committee substitute, for House Bill 399. Gentleman from Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill was the disability health care bill that we've heard several times in chamber. Discussed it yesterday a little bit. And I appreciate the Senate for agreeing to remove the one bad amendment that affected your district. And so that was a big move. And with that, if there's no questions, I'd renew my motion.
Discussion. Gentleman from Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire the gentleman from Boone.
Does the gentleman from Boone yield?
Yes, I do.
Proceed.
Thank you, gentlemen, for going through this. I know it was a little bit of a risk when we don't know what the Senate's doing sometimes, but in 514 yesterday, we just had the base bill, the original bill, plus one amendment on the non-Medicaid eligible. The rest of the stuff that's in your bill is still very important to pass, correct?
That is correct, yes, sir.
And I want you to have the credit because all of the work you've done for the good folks in Columbia and the family that's been really pushing for this, I know they really appreciate all the hard work you've put in, and I'm thrilled to death that your name's going to be on that. I'm glad we had a safety net there just in case. But there's still some things on there that I'm really hoping get across the finish line, and I support your effort, and I support this bill, and I hope the body votes yes.
Thank you for your assistance yesterday, gentlemen. Thanks.
Further discussion, gentleman, St. Louis City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To briefly inquire the bill handler.
Does the gentleman from Boone yield?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Proceed.
You know how much I love this bill. You mentioned one thing was removed. Was it the one thing we were talking about yesterday, the air ambulance part?
Yes, that's out of there.
Excellent work. I can't say enough good about it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Further discussion. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Speaker, I move the previous question.
Gentleman from Jefferson, move the question to immediate consideration. Be now put. All in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Ms. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Ms. Clerk, please close the board. Tally the vote. By your vote of 100 yes, 34 no, you approve the previous question. Gentleman from Boone, you have 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be very, very brief if I can. I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank our floor leader, my colleagues, Senator Hoskins, for his help. But this bill is very important to thousands of Missouri children, and some of them are here today. My buddy Nathan is over here. He's my dog buddy. But this is for not only Nathan, it's for Isabella, Lily, Will, Zach, Colton, Tanyan, and thousands of other Missouri children. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that the conference committee support substitute for Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House committee substitute for House Bill 399 as amended be third read and passed.
Gentleman from Boone has moved. Actually, gentlemen, we need to adopt the report, conference report.
On the adoption, excuse me, sir.
The gentleman from Boone has moved for the adoption conference committee report, Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House committee substitute for House Bill 399. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Ms. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board until they vote. By your vote of 136 yes and 6 no, you have adopted conference committee report, Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House committee substitute for House Bill 399. Gentleman from Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize for my error. I move that conference committee substitute for Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House committee substitute for House Bill 399 be third read and passed.
The gentleman from Boone has moved for the third reading passage of conference committee substitute for Senate committee substitute for House committee substitute for House Bill 399. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Ms. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board until they vote. By your vote of 138 yes and 4 no, you have third read and passed conference committee substitute for Senate committee substitute for House committee substitute for House Bill 399. Gentleman from Boone, you're recognized for the emergency clause.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to revert to the gentleman from Morgan to speak on that.
Discussion on the emergency clause. Gentleman from Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is on the eligible Medicaid ineligible folks that program is set to expire on June 30th. The bill would not go into effect until August 28th, so they would lose coverage on their Medicaid benefits for July and August if we don't put the emergency clause on. So since we're renewing the program and getting these individuals and keeping them under care, we really need not to have that gap, and that's the emergency clause.
Gentleman from Clay.
To speak in favor of the emergency clause, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I encourage the body to support the emergency clause. Everything my colleagues said before is correct. We do need to have this done and done as quickly as possible to make sure that we get health care coverage for these children that need it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion on the emergency clause. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Yes, they move the previous question.
Gentleman from Jefferson, move the question to be consideration. Be now put. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Ms. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 109 yes, 32 no, you approve the previous question. Gentleman from Boone, you have 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Gentleman from Boone has renewed the motion for the adoption of the emergency clause. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 139 yes and 4 no, you approve the emergency clause. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The next order of business will be House bills with Senate amendments, and I ask that you recognize the gentleman from St. Charles for a motion on Senate substitute, Senate Committee substitute, House Bill 126.
Gentleman from St. Charles, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House adopt the Senate sub for the Senate Committee sub for House Bill 126.
The gentleman from St. Charles move for the adoption of Senate substitute for Senate Committee substitute for House Bill 126. Gentleman from St. Charles.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These principles our founding fathers charged us in upholding for those we represented is exactly why we are here today. To protect the life of the unborn, to preserve and respect the liberty of those babies who have no voice of their own to say that they want to live, and to ensure that these babies are allowed to pursue whatever their heart desires. Just before this session began, I pre-filed House Bill 126 as the very first piece of legislation I would carry this year. This bill started off the same way that each and every member and everybody in the gallery started off, with a simple heartbeat. Given the opportunity to grow through the legislative process, this bill matured into what we now know as the Missouri Stands for the Unborn Act. Across the nation, we have been plagued with extreme states such as New York, Virginia, Illinois, to say the least, that are not only repealing any and all restrictions on abortion, some are even allowing for the murder of a child up to and even after the point they exit their mother's womb. Recently, a legislator in Alabama argued.
Members and guests, we will keep our conversations to a whisper or take them outside. Proceed, gentlemen.
Recently, a legislator in Alabama argued during a filibuster that abortion is justified because, I quote, some kids are unwanted, so you kill them now or you kill them later. That is not only unacceptable, it's downright disgusting. On this very floor, a mere week ago, members argued that a child should not be punished for the actions of their parents. I followed that up with a rhetorical question of whether that child should be killed for the actions of its parents. Today, let me pose that question before this body once more. Should a child, a life inside a mother's womb, be killed due to the actions of its parents? Should it be killed merely because it'll be an inconvenience to its parents or unwanted? The simple answer is no. The House stood for the unborn in a way no other state did earlier this year when we sent House Bill 126 to our colleagues across this building. However, after a lot of misinformation online about what was put in the bill, what was taken out, let me just state the blatant truth that this language before you today is 99.9% identical to what we sent over to the Senate, but even stronger. The two main prongs which the Senate did not include were not even a part of the House bill whatsoever, and were never heard on the House floor or the Senate floor. While undoubtedly these pieces would have made the bill even stronger, it was not what was initially part of the Missouri Stands for the Unborn Act. So let me summarize what is in this bill. First, we still have the thorough list of legislative and scientific findings still in this legislation, which is linked to the different bans on abortion at a hard line of 8 weeks when the heartbeat and brain activity in the baby is found. This ban is linked to those findings, which I just stated. However, if a court is to rule that this ban is unconstitutional, this severance package includes several different bans, the next being 14 weeks, then 18 weeks, then 20. Next, this legislation still includes the trigger ban, which would place an outright ban on abortion in the instance that the Supreme Court would ever overturn Roe v. Wade and its following precedent, or send the right to legislate this area of law back to the states per the 10th Amendment. Third, this still includes the prohibition of selective and discriminatory abortions where a child is being killed simply because of sex, race, or having Down syndrome. Fourth, this legislation still includes the requirement that both parents shall provide written consent for a minor to have an abortion. However, the amendment that the Senate included on this would only apply this section when the parents have been awarded custody, with several exceptions. Fifth, this legislation still includes the requirement that in-state abortion facilities hand out the required printed materials per current law when the individual is an out-of-state referral. Sixth, the Missouri Stands for the Unborn Act still includes the updates that the abortion provider have insurance and medical malpractice from $500,000 to $1 million per occurrence and $3 million in the annual aggregate. Lastly, the Senate included modifications to tax credits for the pregnancy resource centers that we discussed earlier this week. So in sum, this legislation is undoubtedly the most comprehensive, most legally sound pro-life legislation, not only in this state, but in our nation. While others are zeroing in on ways to overturn Roe v. Wade and navigate through the courts as quickly as possible, that is not our goal. However, if and when that fight comes, we will be fully ready. This legislation has one goal, and that goal is to save lives. If this legislation saves just one innocent life, Mr. Speaker, we have succeeded. This carefully crafted legislation has been made to withstand judicial challenges and not cause them. So today I ask you for your support, just as I did in February, to support and vote in favor of the Missouri Stands for the Unborn Act.
Discussion on Senate Committee substitute for House Bill 126. Lady from Montauk.
To speak on the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every single right that we have is only possible for each one of us if we have the right to life. I'm going to say that one more time. Every single right we have is only possible for each one of us if we have the right to life. For without the right to life, we could not enjoy any other right. As President Ronald Reagan said, I've noticed that everyone who is for abortion has already been born. And if not us, who? If not now, when? We must and we shall protect human life at all ages and stages of development. I stand wholeheartedly in support of this bill and its courageous sponsors and encourage the body to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Gentleman from St. Louis County. For what purpose, your eyes?
To speak against the bill.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Members and guests, we will maintain order and civility within the chamber. To the extent there are outbursts, under Rule 15, we do have the opportunity to clear the chamber. It is not my goal to do that today. But with that said, we will maintain our composure. If you want to have conversations, please take them outside. With that, gentleman from St. Louis County, proceed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We just heard on the floor the nuts and bolts of this bill and what it does. What this bill does, it simply takes the rights away from women to make choices about their own health care decisions in this state. That's what this bill does. It's not about life. It's not about anything. I think a lot of it's about campaigns and political fodder. Mr. Speaker, back in 2012, there was a candidate for Senate. His name was Todd Akin. And he had the exact same stances that are in this bill today. And Missourians voted him down and said he's an extreme person. Now the entire Republican Party is in that camp. Mr. Speaker, this does not have any exceptions for rape or incest. This gives more rights to the rapist than it does to the mother. Mr. Speaker.
Gentlemen, 1 minute. Members and guests, for the third time, There will be no outbursts allowed in the chamber. Proceed, gentlemen.
Please let me finish. Mr. Speaker, it also, perpetrators of incest would have more rights. Forcing an 11-year-old kid to have a child, or a 12 or 13-year-old kid that was forced with rape to have a child is unconscionable. And that's what this legislation does. To criminalize doctors who want to look over the health of the women that they care for is ridiculous. They'll get a longer sentence than a rapist would. And a rapist will have parental rights when they get out. This law is barbaric. We should rethink this. I've seen this before in this body where everybody thinks they're right around here, but the people of Missouri are standing up. I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of emails, and they're not just from my district. This is wrong, like other decisions that have been made in this body in the last couple years, and this will come back on everybody. We have to let women make their own health care choices. Thank you.
Further discussion. Lady from right, for what purpose do your eyes?
To speak in support of the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to help carry a piece of this bill back in February when we sent it over to the Senate. Much conversation has been had, lots of accusations have been thrown, and lots of diverse opinions are on the table. But I go back to the words that we say on the first week of every session when we hold up our right hand and swear to uphold the Constitution of the state of Missouri and of the United States. And the words in our founding documents remind us that every life has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these unborn babies that we have helped to save with the decrease of the abortion numbers over the last couple years, they deserve the same rights that all of us have here today. And I ask the body to join in support of making sure that those who cannot speak for themselves, those who should not suffer because of the decisions of other people, have the constitutional rights protected and held dear for their future by voting yes on this bill today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Lady from Jackson, for what purpose do your eyes?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to speak against the bill.
Proceed, lady.
I won't share the story of my sister last year, but what I will say is to let's be honest about our feelings, and let's be honest with what we believe. This bill is not pro-life. Even if I will agree that life begins at conception, I would ask those of you who support this bill to agree with me that it does not end at birth. Life is also about the quality of life. In the last 10 months, we have kicked off 55,000 children from Medicaid, thus endangering their life. 50.7% of the children in the state of Missouri are on free and reduced lunch, which means that they are at a poverty level, so they have a reduced life. We support the death penalty in this state. That is anti-life. We have reduced the funding for transportation for our students to get to school in this entire state. That reduces life, because the less education I have, the less likely I am to be able to earn a living so that I can have a life. This bill is not about pro-life. It is about anti-choice. Anytime we are so disrespectful and immoral that we would force a woman to bring to life a child that is the result of a rape, an incest, or of sex trafficking, we are not thinking about life. I am the product of a single black mama who in 1950 lost her husband. I introduced you to my surviving sister and brother this week. It was hard for my mother, but she made it because she was smart and because she had two parents. I am a single mother. if I did not have a choice in 1987 when I brought my child, or a parent to keep my child, or a brother that you met yesterday, or a sister, my child would not have a decent life, because life is more than breath. I ask you to understand that we are getting ready to say it is okay for my rapist to walk in 15 years, but for me to feed the child, support the child that is the product of the rape for the rest of that child's life, without any regard to the fact that I, as the rape victim, may be mentally deranged, may be mentally unstable, may be depressed, may suffer other mental issues for the rest of that child's life. This bill is not about pro-life. I am a woman. It is my body. It is my choice. Just because I am pro-choice does not mean I am anti-life, nor does it necessarily mean I am anti-abortion. I am pro-life. And pro-life means when they start breathing, we make sure that they make it to adulthood. I urge the body to respectfully vote against this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Gentleman from Miller for first years.
To speak on the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you. I have a portion of this bill. It has to do with parents of minors and notification. And yesterday when I read through it, my idea was that I was going to get up here and rail on the inadequacies of the other chamber, because they didn't do us much of a favor on that particular portion of the bill. They took out the fact if you're married. Seems odd because over and over again I've heard time and time again that not everybody has a fairy tale marriage, and that wasn't from our side. And I get it. You don't have a fairy tale marriage. What I wanted to do was start a conversation and for people to understand that there is another choice. And that choice is life rather than killing. So I'm disappointed in the other chamber that they chose to go half measures on this. I've heard over and over again that half measures have availed us nothing. Hopefully in this case, half measures will avail us life. And that's fine with me. I'm good with that. However, from this point forward, for as long as I'm in the body and in the position in which I can, I will scrutinize every bill, particularly ones from the other chamber, to make sure that horrific mistakes like that could cost life, that could cause damage, don't happen. So I would urge anyone that wants legislation in the upcoming year to make sure that there's a House version. Now, that was going to be the end of my story. But there's more. My part, many of the freshmen have not heard my story. The seniors probably are tired of it. I'm going to give you my story. 14 years ago, I found out that I was going to be a grandfather. Wasn't planned. And even though they say there is none, there was a Planned Parenthood clinic in my area during that time. Thank God it's gone now. So I met my ex-wife and my 15-year-old daughter at the Planned Parenthood clinic, and was told, hey, don't worry about it. We've already scheduled the abortion. Everything's going to be fine. To say I was in shock would be to lessen how I felt. So I asked the nurse that was there, I guess it was a nurse, I have no idea, the representative of the Planned Parenthood. I asked them, you know, I still have custody of my daughter for 2 weeks, and I would like to think about it. And at very least, I don't want this to happen while I have custody. Is that going to put her in any danger whatsoever? No, it would not. So we waited 2 weeks. I asked my wife, what do we do? She said, pray. I'm not good at that. I'm not good at not doing stuff. I like doing stuff. Praying doesn't feel like I'm doing anything, or it used to be that way. Things have changed. So I prayed. During that 2 weeks, my young daughter asked, what exactly is involved? Because nobody had really told her. What is involved in this? Well, we had tried to block the internet, but we couldn't. So we ended up saying, just look it up. So she looked it up, and she came down and she said, I cannot do that. And then we had a lot of decisions to make, and so we did. And we were blessed. We were blessed with a girl, and she made a good choice. And so, that being said, now we come to the Paul Harvey part. Many of you have heard that part before. Now there's why I'm never speaking on this again. Ever. Ever. Because when I was a young man/boy, I was involved in an abortion. I had my part in it. I didn't know anything. It's not an excuse, it's just the truth. I did not know what I was doing. I am so glad that in the 30-some-odd years since, we now have the ability to inform people like me and the unfortunate person that had to go through that horrific medical procedure to kill a baby, that we now know, and we have been given information to know what is going on. Missouri takes a giant step forward to save life today. And I thank God for that. I thank God for that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Lady from St. Louis County Unsecure District, from your eyes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to speak on the bill.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Laundry bleach, acid, bitter concoction, knitting needles, bicycle spokes, ballpoint pens, jumping from the top of the stairs or the roof. These are ways that women around the world who don't have access to legal abortion perform their own. Abortion is a health care issue. Pregnancy is a health issue. When women don't have access to the health care they need, to the health care they seek, they will find a way to get it themselves. I have statistics from the CDC from the number of pregnancy-related maternal mortality there were around the country in 1963. Before Roe versus Wade, abortion was stigmatized, so I expect these numbers are very, very low. But 208 women were recorded as dying from abortion-related complications in 1963. That's about 19% of all maternal mortality. In 2014, 6 women died nationally out of complications from legal abortions. We will be killing women with this bill. This is a horrible bill. Women need to make their own choices, and women will make their own choices. I know many of you don't like abortion, but it is a health care decision that women make and will continue to make. Women are desperate when they are pregnant and they don't want to be. Women sometimes have health complications from pregnancy. the United States, the maternal mortality rate, the rate of women who die as a result of pregnancy or childbirth, is about 20. In Missouri, it's 32.6 last year. We already have a high maternal mortality rate. We passed a bill yesterday to look at why women are dying from pregnancy and childbirth. Do we want our maternal mortality rate to go up by almost 20%? Because it will with this bill. We don't have exceptions for the health of the mother unless there's an emergency. Do we want women to have to wait until their health problem becomes an emergency before they can terminate the pregnancy? If they're going to terminate it because of a health problem. This is a cruel bill. It is mean-spirited, and I urge the body to vote against it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Lady from Green, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak from a microphone other than my own.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I stated when this bill came before the House early in February, I stated that we are doing a good thing. And I still stand by that. Missouri is doing an incredible thing. We are a pro-life state, and we are here to prove it. I am very honored to carry a portion of this bill. My portion was the informed consent portion that makes sure that women who seek an abortion out of state have the information provided to them so that they know what they are doing. And there are other opportunities and other alternatives other than abortion. Missouri cares about its unborn citizens. Across the state, in Illinois, in 2017, over 39,000 abortions were performed. When you say abortion, that means a life. Over 39,000 lives were terminated in 2017. Missouri is a pro-life state, and we want to make sure that we do everything possible to make sure every life counts. This is an emotional topic. I can feel the emotion in this room because this is important. I don't think there's anything more important than what we are doing right now. We are taking a bold stand. Missouri is taking a stand. Missouri stands for the unborn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Lady from St. Louis County Lavender District, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak against the bill.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I speak to the gentleman from the Jackson County Razor District?
Does the gentleman from Jackson yield?
I do.
Proceed.
Thank you, gentlemen. What do you have to say about this bill?
Lady, I think if we are truly worried about the precious life of people, then it's time we also start to address the precious life of LGBT youth that are committing suicide throughout this state. Until we do, we don't care about life, we simply care about birth.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I speak to the lady from the Jackson District, Burnett District?
Does the lady from Jackson yield?
Yes, I do.
Proceed.
Thank you, lady. What do you have to say about this?
I really appreciate you asking me. You know, I've worked really hard on one issue in particular, which is making sure that all children have access to quality education. And it seems to me that if we really believe that all life is precious, we would make higher education affordable for our children and dreamers to make this a more welcoming place for the babies that are born here. Thank you.
Thank you, lady. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the gentleman from St. Louis County Clemens District?
Does the gentleman from St. Louis County yield?
I do, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What do you have to say about this bill?
I believe that if we care about people's lives, we need to make sure that no Missourian goes without access to health care, that our homeless are sheltered and given proper treatment, We treat psychological disorders. And I would like to see that every woman who takes a microphone in this room is asked to speak before any man. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the gentleman from Jackson County, the Sauls District?
Does the gentleman from Jackson yield, and do you have a clear path?
I do.
Proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. What do you have to say about this?
Thank you, lady. I just heard a few seconds ago that Missouri is a pro-life state, and I think ultimately what I would want to say to that is if we are a pro-life state, then if you want to be pro-life, then you need to advocate for paid maternity leave. You need to advocate for mental health care funding. You need to not cut programs that feed hungry kids. You need to you wouldn't make pregnancy a pre-existing condition. You would advocate for prenatal education. You would equally be concerned about maternal mortality rates. If you want to be pro-life, then you understand that if you can argue that a life form the size of a pea is entitled to rights, then surely my friend and colleague, the gentleman from the Mackey District and the gentleman from the Razor District, are entitled to rights too. Because you see, life doesn't end inside the womb. If you can force an 11-year-old girl to carry her father's baby to term, when it could very well harm her, not just physically, but mentally, that is not pro-life. You can't say you're pro-life when you're prepared to have a child risk her life to give birth to a rapist's baby. That's not pro-life. There is not a single thing in this world that a male can experience that would come close to the indignity of being legally forced to carry your rapist's baby. And that is what is frustrating to me, among other things, about this legislation. If you want to press the issue about being pro-life, then I want to see you equally outraged the next time a pregnant black woman dies while in handcuffs. I want to see you equally outraged when migrant children are pulled from their mother's arms and placed into cages. I want to see you equally outraged when those same children are lost by the government or are molested or die in custody. Because if you are going to be pro-life and you say you're going to be pro-life, then show me.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the lady from St. Louis County, the Walker District?
Does the lady from St. Louis County yield?
I do, thank you.
Proceed.
What would you have to say for me?
Well, it's kind of hard to follow that, but if we really believed in life for everyone, we'd expand Medicaid in this state. If we believed in life, we wouldn't have the death penalty in this state. If we believed in life, I would not be afraid to have a child right now, because the likelihood of me dying in childbirth is 4 times higher.
4 times higher.
It's not hyperbole. It's reality. And the lack of access to health care, the full range of health care, and the ability for women and men, for people to make health care decisions with their own doctors and people that they trust is going to cause lives. Thank you.
Thank you, lady. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the lady from the Morgan District?
Does the lady from Jackson yield?
Raise your hand.
No. I do, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What do you have to share?
Lady, if we thought that all life was precious, we would make an exception for rape so that young girls like the 11-year-old in Ohio who was raped repeatedly by a 26-year-old man, got pregnant, we would make an exception for rape for people like that. And this morning on the news, on my way in, I heard the minority leader of the U.S. House in Washington, D.C. say He thought the Alabama law went too far because Republicans believe in exceptions for rape and incest. That's what he said. And if all life was precious, I agree with the lady from the Walker District and some of the others that we would expand Medicaid for the 300,000 hardworking, low-income Missourians who don't have health care. I think they deserve health care. That's about life, and it's the greatest disappointment of my legislative career, lady.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the lady from St. Louis County, Chappelle Nadal District?
Does the lady from St. Louis County yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed.
Thank you, lady. What can you share with us today?
I can share with you an example I saw last night on Facebook of a woman who lives in my district who decided to have her child. And she said today, happy birthday to my child, but it's so sad that her father was murdered before she became 1 year old. And so what I think about is when you do let a life go to full term, what happens to that black life once that child is 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 17 and cannot read and write and is actively sexual, and they have multiple generations of children who again don't have the education that they need, and then we see death upon death upon death, and it's generational. And so I ask the question, life for some begins very early, but what happens to that life when it's black and they die really early?
Know what I think is important? If we thought life was precious, we would not make our seniors choose between medication and food. And yet in our state budget, we do. If we thought life was precious, I think today the governor of the state would call an emergency to find out why 18,000 children have been dropped off of our health care rolls. And we don't even know 18,000 children since January of this year don't have access to health care.
And you know what happens, lady? As I've stated before, I go to St. Louis County Juvenile Justice Center every Christmas. 67% of those children have a mental illness, and they're not getting the health care that they deserve, and most of them are black.
Lady, if we thought all life was precious, we would certainly find a way to protect our children from gun violence. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, lady from Scott.
Speak in favor of the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've spoke many times on this floor in my past 7 years. That I come from a family who's dealt with rape and incest for generations. At 15, I had to quit school to take care of my family, and at 15, I was pregnant, homeless at times as a child. And at 16, I had my daughter. My mother struggled with mental illness, so she refused to help me. I did it on my own. And by the grace of God, He strengthened me, taught me, and I'm sure I wasn't the best mama. But I learned as I went through it. We made it, and I praise God for what He's done for me and my family. Life begins at conception. Psalms 119 says, your hands made me and formed me. That's the very initial stages. Those in our family who have struggled and come from the horrific crimes that we have just talked about, I'm glad they chose life. Regardless of incest and rape, I'm so glad they chose life. And then to stand on the floor and say, how could we make someone look at a child from rape or incest and to care for them, I can say how we can do that. We can do that with the love of God that he puts in our hearts for those children. Because I can tell you that they are beautiful and smart and intelligent. And I'm so glad that they didn't have to pay for the crimes of their father. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud that our body, that our state is standing for the unborn. And I do care for those who go through poverty after they are born. I've lived it. Pregnant, 15, and homeless, I've lived it. With a family that I couldn't turn to, I've lived it. And this bill is the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Lady from Boone, for push your eyes.
Speak against the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you. I've been trying to prepare myself to talk about this bill, and cried a lot with colleagues and friends and family and my husband this week, as we knew it was approaching. One of my colleagues brought up the very desperate and dangerous things that women do when they don't have access to a safe and legal abortion. I was born in 1983, 10 years after Roe v. Wade. I haven't had to experience what many, many, many women had experienced before abortion was legal. I have seen states chip away at my rights. It's been an effort over the past decades, in a very clear effort to try to overturn Roe v. Wade. But I think about the women and how scary it must have been to seek out an illegal abortion. I can't imagine how scary that was. I have a couple of stories. Miss Magazine did an issue a couple years ago in 2016 asking people to write in stories about life before Roe v. Wade. I'm going to share a couple of those. I'm a 62-year-old man, but I know that my single mother had an illegal abortion in her teens before I was born. It almost killed her. She couldn't stop bleeding and couldn't go to the hospital without facing criminal charges. All she could do was wait it out in a hotel room. Apparently, her boyfriend collected newspapers for her to sit on to collect the blood. Another submission. My submission is very short. It's about my mother, born 1924, died 1971. In 9th grade, a good friend became pregnant by our AAU coach. He threatened to kill her if she told how she became pregnant. Her parents were divorced, and her mother had committed suicide a few weeks prior. She borrowed money from everyone and wrote a check on her dad's account to go to the local abortionist. She died in the girls' bathroom a week later. She was a very talented artist and composed music. I had known her since 3rd grade, and even now, at 82, can hear the laughter, and I have a caricature of myself she drew. She had to be buried in a different cemetery, as was Catholic raised, as did her mom. After her death, a group told the coach to quit or we would tell. We were 14-year-old kids doing the best we could for our friend. She was just a baby herself. That was from Evelyn. I am very sad and angry for Missouri women and girls. I also think it's very disingenuous to say that this is not about overturning Roe v. Wade. It's very clear that's what this is an attempt to do. We know that elected officials across this country are in a political race to do just that. I urge the body to vote against this bill today.
Further discussion. Gentleman from St. Charles, for what purpose do you rise?
Speak on the bill, Madam Speaker, from a mic other than my own.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to address just a few things, if you'll indulge me. When we sat down to craft this legislation, Madam Speaker, we wanted to put in place a very pro-life bill. So what we did was we understood that there are going to be situations where a medical emergency is necessary, an exception for a medical emergency. So that's in the bill. So just to dispel any fears regarding that, that is in the bill because the whole purpose of the bill is to optimize life, Madam Speaker. We have heard very passionately and eloquently from some of my colleagues regarding the issue of rape. And to that, I must confess that if we are in fact pro-life, what kind of hypocrite would I be to not have a bill that is 100% pro-life? One act of injustice does not justify another. Madam Speaker, even the rapist does not get the death penalty because the United States Supreme Court has ruled that it is a cruel and unusual punishment. So for us to give the death penalty to an innocent child is not the way to go. In Missouri, we have funded and we have over 104 pregnancy resource centers in the state to offer alternatives and health care to women in need. And that's exactly what we're doing here in the Show Me State. If you'll indulge me, Madam Speaker, I have a story. I have a friend who was a battalion commander in Iraq in 2003, 2004. And we were sitting down over dinner a few months ago, and I recall him telling me a story. One of his greatest regrets when he was in Iraq, he and one of his units went to a rural area of Baghdad, and there was a school, very dilapidated, had many problems. So, Madam Speaker, what they went ahead and did was they went, and their team, their task force, went to clean up this school, to refurbish the school, do some remodeling. But while they were there, he noticed that there were some teenagers running up to him with a baby in their arms. He told me at this moment that he was not sure what to do. Obviously, you get into a situation like that, your priority is to take care of your men. And you don't know if a teenager, you didn't know, he did not know, if they were armed or if they were suicide bombers. But they took a chance, and they came up to them, and through an interpreter, they found out that these teenagers, Madam Speaker, were trying to give this baby to the Americans. And he told me, he said, for a minute, he thought there, he wasn't sure what to do, and he thought through all the codes, all the training, all the regulations, and trying to ascertain, what do I do in this scenario? And he couldn't find the answer to that. He told his men, he said, give the baby back. You got to give it back. To this day, Madam Speaker, he dreams about that at night. Could that child have come to the United States? Could they eventually have been in this very body as a member pledging allegiance to our own flag? Could that child be alive today? So my urge, my recommendation, Madam Speaker, is I hope that we in this body do not share in that regret. In 10 or 20 years from now, when we're old and gray, when we are walking through the grocery store, or maybe we're sitting on the porch, or we're playing board games with our grandchildren and children, I pray, I hope, that when we look back at this day, we can keep our heads held high, knowing that we did the right thing. So I urge my colleagues, Madam Speaker, to vote yes on this bill to save countless lives.
Further discussion. Lady from Jackson, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I please inquire of my friend from St. Louis County from the Mackey District?
Does the gentleman from St. Louis County yield?
I do.
Proceed, lady.
Hi, friend.
Hi. Good morning.
I'm going to do something. A lot of people in here know my stance, but I want to make sure that my children do. So I'm going to read you a letter that I've written to my daughter. She's 2.5. Dear Hattie, when you were born, you were not breathing. Your umbilical cord was wrapped tightly around your neck, and I was told to stop pushing. As you were born, you were taken quickly away from me by a team of nurses and doctors who set off code blue alarms throughout our unit. Your tiny body was suctioned and pressed on, and during that time, while I was having my own medical emergency, I held my breath. For you see, my life was linked to yours. That time in limbo, although so brief, was the most terrifying of my life. Soon you were pink and cooing in my arms, but I will never forget that feeling of almost losing you and the way I steeled myself to fight for you forever. You see, Hattie, I decided to come here and fight for you and your brother and the rights and protections of all children. I came here to fight for your rights, Hattie, rights your brother will never have threatened. Rights to make the most intimate, intricate decisions anyone can ever make and that no one should be making on your behalf. I have sat with little girls not much older than you, and I have listened to them talk about people they trusted hurting them, stealing their innocence and their trust in the world. I have held their hands as they cried and blamed themselves. I have worked with them to heal from pain that so many women are forced to endure. And I will teach you how to defend yourself physically, how to hold keys between your knuckles, how to spot someone following you, how to watch your drink, how to lock your door the second you enter your car, and how to look for warning signs in men you thought you could trust. Things I will never have to teach your brother. I dread teaching you the other part, how not to blame yourself, how to see value in yourself after your clothes and your body have been ripped apart, how not to hate your body, how to see that your trauma is not you, how to not carry shame into every relationship you have, a shame that is not yours to hold. But I know that the odds are stacked against you, that there are more women sitting in this chamber who have been assaulted than those that have not. Hattie, I'll teach your brother other things. I'll teach him to listen when people say no, to respect that he doesn't have the right to anyone else's body ever. I will teach him that girls get to make their own decision. I will teach him to believe in women's inherent dignity and that girls know what's best for their lives and their bodies.
I agree, lady. Thank you.
Mr. Mackey, do you have anything to say?
Yes, I have 15 minutes of thoughts that I'm going to distill as best I can in 5 minutes, lady. Thank you. I want everybody to look at page 9 of this bill, point 2. There's been a lot of talk about the punishment that goes on doctors. Well, I can tell you as an attorney, I look at every statute and I think who the liability goes on here. Right here, any person who performs an abortion is going to be guilty of a Class B felony. Let's think very quickly of a hypothetical of a woman who's in an estranged relationship with a sexual partner and has a pregnancy as a result of that sexual encounter, who then has a miscarriage. and whose estranged, abusive sexual partner accuses her of having that miscarriage on purpose. Where does she find herself, lady? In a courtroom, defending herself from her miscarriage. That's who's going to be punished. Lady, there's been a lot of talk today about where LGBT rights come from. As an LGBT member of this body and of this state and of this country, I know where my rights come from, the U.S. Constitution. And how anyone can read that and not have privacy leap off of the page, not the word itself, the sentiment, the expression, the embodiment of that word in the U.S. Constitution is enshrined in Roe versus Wade the way it was enshrined in Griswold. And because of that, a Roman Catholic Reagan appointee by the name of Justice Anthony Kennedy and his eminent jurist colleagues, lady, tied Obergefell and Windsor and Lawrence and the cases that gave me equal rights in this country to the cases that gave women equal rights in this country. This is nothing but an affront, not to Roe versus Wade, but to what it stands for, to the U.S. Constitution itself. The right to privacy in this country, privacy from intrusion from your government, whether that's what you want to speak, whether you want to bear arms, whether that's against unreasonable search and seizure. Today in this body, we, the government, us right here, members, are seizing every woman in this state. We are seizing her, and we may as well be the ones tying her hands to the bedposts and forcing her into childbirth. That is what we are doing, lady. Women brought all of us into this world, and I sure hope they vote all of us out.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I please inquire of the gentleman from St. Louis City from the Franks District?
Would you restate your inquiry?
Yes, Madam Speaker. May I please inquire of the gentleman from St. Louis City, the Franks District?
Does the gentleman from St. Louis City yield?
Yes, I do, Madam Speaker.
You have 3 minutes left. Proceed, lady.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
What do you have to say about this bill?
It's very hard to follow what the gentleman from St. Louis County said. It's hard to follow what every single person has said on this side of the aisle. I will never sit here and argue or compete when it comes to women. It's your choice. It's not my choice. Where I'll speak from is a place where I haven't thought of. I have 4 beautiful, amazing daughters. My daughter is 15. I'm not one of those parents that's naive. I know in due time for anybody to press this button to force my daughter, their daughters, no matter who, because I'm not, lady, I'm not even talking to you right now. I'm talking to the pro-life men in this building that have daughters. I heard somebody quote Martin Luther King the other day, so as my last time talking on this floor, I'll say what I've always said. There comes a time when you do something, not because it's political, not because it's safe, not because it's popular, but because your conscience tells you it's right. And it's not right that we will force our daughters. Thank you, lady.
Thank you, gentlemen. May I please, Madam Speaker, may I please talk to the gentlelady from the St. Louis County District, from the Chapal-Nadal District?
Does a lady from St. Louis City County yield?
Yes.
And you
Madam
have
Speaker.
1 minute left.
Thank you so much. In very short terms, I will tell you I was a victim of rape in college. And I hated the smell. I hated everything about the experience. And it reminds me of the situation that we are in right now, where there are so many young ladies who are in college or in other places where they will have the experience of rape. I was lucky I didn't get pregnant, but I was lucky because I found a friend who did get pregnant, and I walked with her and took care of her so that she could get her abortion. And I said for the rest of my life, if I ever run into a woman who was raped and who was in the situation where she was pregnant and did not want to have that child for some reason, I was going to be there. There's an older woman on my street who reminds me all the time about what it was like when she had her illegal abortion. She actually had a wire. She tells me about it. It's a black woman. And when I walk down the street with my dogs, she says, "Let me remind you what it was like when I got my abortion." The friendliest lady on the block.
Lady, your time has expired. Further discussion on Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House Bill 126. Gentleman from Cape, for what purpose do you rise?
Madam Speaker, to speak from a mic other than my own.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Madam Speaker, to inquire the bill handler from St. Charles District.
Does the gentleman from St. Charles yield?
I do.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Gentlemen, thank you for taking my inquiry. We've heard a lot of things today, and even I personally, my personal belief of when life begins, which is at conception, has been challenged today because this bill doesn't even go there. When does this ban or moratorium start? When abortions are no longer allowed to be made?
Well, gentlemen, the abortion ban would effectively take place at 8 weeks. I know there's a lot of talk, whether it's in the media or here on the floor today. It's the same discussions that we had back in February. So to refresh the recollection of the body, these exceptions that you're discussing, they're built in. There's no additional exceptions. No member of the minority party in the House or the Senate offered an amendment which would satisfy what they believe is an exception. I know I had discussions with a member of our body, and the language that he had to address rape and incest, he believed initially that it would be up to the point of the 8, 14, 18, or 20. But due to the fact that there is no exception, and I firmly believe that life does begin at conception. However, there's something called the law. There's something called the supremacy clause. And looking at all the cases and talking to all the attorneys and legal minds behind this is why we crafted it in this way. If it was up to me, the injustice of abortion would be gone nationwide, but that's not up to me. We have the law, and that's why we crafted it this way. So in the instance of rape, incest, you as a former law enforcement officer, I think you and I will both agree that the criminals who are perpetrating those crimes on the innocent victims, we should prosecute them to the fullest extent. And I think we need to revisit those issues and those laws so we can figure out why the Supreme Court and why certain groups that helped prevent the death penalty for rapists are now advocating for the death penalty for the unborn. But back to your point that these issues of exceptions, there's an exception built in. While I do believe that life does begin at conception, somebody who's a victim or wants to seek medical treatment and seek that abortion up to that 8 weeks, they're allowed to do so. And I encourage anybody to go seek medical treatment like you and I have indicated, whether it's Plan B or seeking the medical care and then going to law enforcement. But then if that's overturned, they have 14 weeks. And then if that's overturned, they have 18 weeks. And if that's overturned, they have 20 weeks.
Couple points, and I've been a person who's taken reports of rape. I've taken reports of incest. I have been involved in those investigations, and there's many different levels when we talk about those things. All of them are terrible. I do agree with you that whenever someone is doing something like that, they should be prosecuted for that. I know I heard earlier about the death penalty, how we want to allow babies that we believe in pro-life, but then we will still do the death penalty. But there's a big exception when we're talking about innocent life and someone who's went out and purposely killed someone that would make them eligible for that death penalty. And those are topics I want to discuss later. But by having this point not start until 8 weeks, let's just say someone goes out and they're raped or they're sexually assaulted one night after a college party. Because most of my rapes were not the gentleman jumping out of the bushes that nobody had ever met. That was 1 or 2 times out of 100. Most of them were date rapes or consensual rapes, which were all terrible. But I'd sat in court set in court when juries would struggle with those type of situations where it was a he said, she said, and they would find the person not guilty. Unfortunate if it really happened, but I had no control over that because it was a judge or a jury making those decisions. But let's just say someone is sexually assaulted. They have 8 weeks to make a decision. I've never really studied it, but I've heard of the morning after pill, where if someone feels that they've been sexually assaulted, they could go do that. Gives them ample time in that 8 weeks to make those exclusions, which I may not be comfortable with, but it does give those people that exclusion. And I wanted to point that out to you while we were talking about
But yeah, and gentlemen, I agree. That's why we crafted it, looking at the different cases from Roe and beyond, from the cases that have been thrown out in the 8th Circuit, which we are part of. And that is why, and I'll say this again, as a Catholic, I do believe life begins at conception. That is built into our legislative findings currently in law, which was just reiterated by the Missouri Supreme Court in a case, I believe, earlier this year. But the fact of the matter remains that when we talk about exceptions, we are not Alabama. Our law is not mirroring Alabama. Alabama bans abortion once you find out that you're pregnant and sentences the perpetrator or the abortion doctor to 99 years of life in prison. This is not our law. So for anybody to reference that law, it's untrue, because we have exceptions built in, whether it's 8 weeks, 14, 18, or 20. And while I may not personally and morally agree with the options that people are going to partake in up to that point, they still have those options. Nobody's requiring anybody to carry a rapist or a criminal's baby to term. We have provided options up to 8 weeks, 14, 18, and 20. And I'll state that again. We have all the options in the world up to 8 weeks, 14, 18, and 20. Whenever that court draws a line like we have asked them to do, they have the options. So that is wholly untrue for somebody to state otherwise.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the inquiry.
Further discussion. Lady from Jefferson, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Permission to speak from a microphone not my own.
Proceed.
Thank you. Throughout history, women have been subjugated. Women have been told that their value is less than men. Women have been told that we do not have an equal place in the workforce. We don't have an equal place in the marketplace. We don't have an equal seat at the table. I'm a mother of 6. I was told that if I had my children young, that my career would be stifled. My first son was born between my first and second year of law school, my second son during my third year of law school. And for all of the women in the audience, I think you'll find this a little interesting. The only class I ever failed in my life was gender in the law. The professor failed me because I missed too many classes for giving birth. What's fascinating about that is that I think that the woman didn't like my opinion. And I think a lot of the women in the room today are not going to like my opinion. I believe firmly that no matter what age you are, that if you are a woman, if you are a man, your life has value. You have inherent dignity provided by the Constitution. You have inherent dignity, protected by the Constitution. And inherent dignity provided by God. Abortion is the ultimate and might makes right. It is saying that if I don't have the ability to kill my child, that I as a woman cannot obtain whatever dreams and beliefs I may have. It's saying that my economic opportunities will be limited if I do not pay that price with the blood of my child. It's saying if I do not listen to the men who stand behind me and say, this is inconvenient, let me help you pay for your abortion, that my life has no value. It goes on and on and on. If you are a woman who has an opinion that is different, then you're a bad feminist, you're a bad woman, you're a traitor to your race, you're a horrible person. If you're a pro-life woman of color, as friends of mine are, I've heard that. If you're 15 and you get pregnant, if your father of your child is a rapist and has harmed you, then you don't have any other option. We're told that abortion will not be safe if it is illegal. I'm here to tell you abortion is not safe. A person dies in every procedure. And the list goes on and on and on of health and safety violations that occur within those clinics. I'm here to tell you that our freedom cannot be bought with the blood of our children. I'm here to tell you that from the moment of conception until natural death, I will fight for your inherent dignity and I ask the body to please support this legislation, despite how unpopular and how horrid the comments may come at you on social media, despite the death threats to your children, despite the threats to rape your daughters, because that's all come at me in the last 24 hours. And I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I am not doing this to be popular or political or to overturn Roe. I'm doing this to save the lives of the women and the children who are not, and the men and the women who will be coming after. I'm doing it to protect innocent life here in the state of Missouri. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion. Lady from Green, for what purpose do you rise?
Madam Speaker, I would like to inquire from the lady from Jackson Land Man Love District, please.
Does the lady from Jackson yield?
I do.
Proceed, lady.
Permission to speak from mic, not my own.
Proceed.
Hi, lady. You're not going to get called on because we're about to be previous question and this debate's about to be ended despite the tons of folks still ready to talk about it. So I wanted to give you a quick 30 seconds to say what you wanted to say.
I appreciate that. As Roe v. Wade was about privacy, and those who are opposed to pro-choice are often huge proponents of privacy, as most are against the sunshine laws for privacy concerns. As children, we are taught that our sex organs are called private parts. I find it interesting that we have turned this topic into a public debate, where it should be a safe and private conversation between a woman and her medically certified OBGYN. Thank you.
Thank you, lady. Madam Speaker, may I inquire of the lady from the Prouty District, St. Louis County, please?
Does the lady from St. Louis County yield?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, yes.
Proceed, lady.
Lady, you too, I'd like to give you a chance to speak.
Sure. I have to, and I wasn't going to speak on this because honestly, as a person, I am personally pro-life. I am a black woman with lupus. I'm not even sure if I can have children. It's not a child that I don't lay eyes, and God knows I love children. And it's not a child that I lay my eyes on that I don't want. However, that doesn't mean that I get to force anyone to have a child. But let me say this right here and right now. There is no such thing as consensual rape.
Thank you, lady. Madam Speaker.
Members and guests, we will keep decorum.
Madam Speaker, may I please inquire of the gentleman from the Jackson District, Razor, please?
Does the gentleman from Jackson yield?
I do.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, gentlemen. We spent a lot of time this session trying to get you some rights.
Yes. I'm going to try to make this quick. We've heard a lot of debate today from the other side of the aisle about just how much they love life and how pro-life they are. But I don't want to hear that you're pro-life when you look at an 11-year-old girl who has been raped by her father, tell her she has to have the kid, and then not give her the services to raise that kid afterwards. That's not pro-life.
Thank you.
Just yesterday, we heard on this floor, our colleague, the gentleman from the Franks District, stood here and told us that he was leaving this body because of mental health issues. I don't want to hear that they're pro-life until they have the same sort of debate to make sure that we're addressing mental health issues in this state as we should. And by the way, instead of lining up to hug him as he leaves, how about next year we come in and address the issues about the lives that are being lost in his district?
Yes.
The lady from Scott has year after year after year tried to address the prescription drug program in this state. And year after year after year, there are 6 conservative senators that block it. Don't tell me you're pro-life until you stand up to those senators and let the dying end for that. And don't tell me you're pro-life until you finally stand up and address the fact that too many teenagers just like me that are gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender are killing themselves. Don't tell me you're pro-life until you address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Madam Speaker, may I please inquire of the gentleman from St. Louis City, Meredith District?
Does the gentleman from St. Louis City yield?
I do.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you. Gentlemen, we've had a lot of emotions on the floor, and it's only going to continue when I start talking. But I believe the gentleman from the Schroer District spoke a little out of turn on what this bill does, and I wanted to give you a moment as an attorney to break down in as quickly as possible what this bill actually does.
Thank you, lady. Thank you for the opportunity. I had hoped to talk, of course, in great length. As briefly as possible, I think it's really important that people in this body understand this bill is not an 8-week ban. This bill is a conception ban. This bill has language that if any part of Roe is overturned, then we institute a ban from the moment of conception. And we're not just talking about, a procedural abortion. We're talking about it's defined to include a medicine that a woman may take to terminate a pregnancy. And that includes prior to implantation. And we're talking about potentially taking a morning after pill a felony, a Class B felony.
So the morning after pill, that prevents pregnancy. So if I get raped and I need to take the morning after pill, and I choose to do that, then I'm going to get a felony.
Under this language, I think so.
What else is in there?
Well, I would say the key to that is not only is it a ban there's no exception for rape, as we've talked at length about. So if your body is used against you, you're raped, it's now going to be forced to be used against you for 9 months and possibly kill you. No exception for incest. But there's also no exception for the health of the mother or even the viability of the baby. So if a baby is without organs that are appropriate, you are forced to continue to grow that baby inside of you, forced to grow it, potentially kill you while that baby is suffering because you are no longer allowed to have an abortion without committing a Class B felony, lady.
Thank you, gentlemen. Madam
Thank
Speaker,
you.
may I speak on the bill?
Proceed, lady.
I could say so many things right now, but I'm going to try my best to keep this short in the 4 minutes I have left. Since my story of abuse, colleagues of mine, didn't affect your vote, that deeply personal story that tons of you came up to me in the hallways and it said, I'm sorry. Sorry that happened to you, since that isn't changing your minds. Since you're fine with forcing children who have been raped to have their rapist babies. I truly hope when y'all go to sleep tonight that you think about that 11-year-old in Alabama we've all heard about, or the 12-year-old from Alabama. I want you to think of the 5,700 children in the state of Missouri who had sexual abuse cases investigated in 2017. Most importantly for me, and this goes to Mr. Speaker, who's somewhere on the floor, I hope every time you see me, every time the rest of you see me in this hallway, that you think of the story that I told you of my trauma from my abuse. That abuse does not define me, but it is me. I think about it every day. I relive it in my most intimate moments with my very own husband. When you each see me in this hallway, remember what you're doing to little girls who were like me. Because that abuse is me, and you simply don't care. And to the women of this state and the women up here, I'm sorry. I'm sorry there aren't enough of us in this chamber to stop this. I'm sorry you're viewed as second-class citizens. Now it's up to you to change this. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion. Gentleman from Green, for what purpose do you rise? There will be decorum in here, members and guests. There has been a violation of the rules, and the galleries will now be, guests will be removed from the gallery. Gentleman from Green, for what purpose do you rise?
To speak on the bill, Madam Speaker.
Proceed, gentleman.
Thank you, lady. I'd like to take the body briefly back to the first day of session. I stood on that dais, coincidentally enough, in this tie, and I said that we stand for the innocent, and we stand for the infirm, we stand for the born, and we stand for the unborn. And one of the things about a lot of the dialogue on the floor today is how our party, the majority members, only care about the unborn. And there's other parts we care about, and I wanted to kind of run through all the ways we've tried to support the innocent and the infirm and the born as well as the unborn. We've fought the sex trafficking industry. We've strengthened child care facilities. We've opened new juvenile advocacy centers. We've protected victims of domestic violence by changing our landlord and tenant laws. We've appropriated $1 million to make improvements to the Missouri School of the Blind, $1 million for an extension center for autism, increases for Medicaid funding, $20 million to appropriate to pick up the loss of federal funds for mental health programs. We've established a senior services growth and development program. We've passed legislation to stop fentanyl abuse and the Fresh Start Act. We've authorized the early parole of offenders over the age of 65. We've spent the last 4.5 months standing for the innocent, standing for the infirm, and standing for the born. It's now here on the last day of session that we have the opportunity to finish this list and to stand for the unborn. Now, most of you know I've got 4 children. I've had the opportunity to listen to their heartbeats, usually one at a time, sometimes 2 at a time. And I know that my oldest son, who's 8, knows a little bit about what we're doing. My 6-year-old and 4-year-old twins, they don't. And by the time that they're old enough to know what we've done today, they won't remember it. And I think that's one of the things about the discussion we've had on the floor today, other than the unfortunate outbursts, is that this is an incredibly passionate issue, and it's an incredibly personal issue for members on both sides. But the words that we've heard today, the incredibly elegant and eloquent words that both sides have expressed on this issue, will get lost in time. They'll be repeated today on social media, tomorrow in the headlines, but in a week or a month or a year, people will not remember what was said here today. What they will remember today is how we vote. And that is the one lasting piece of everything we do on the floor today. My children will remember how I vote the rest of my life. My son and my daughters will remember and will know exactly the position that I took the rest of my life and the rest of their lives. And I truly believe that every member of this body will be proud of the vote they take today. Now, for me and for my colleagues, for the architects of this legislation, we believe that the right vote is to vote for this bill. We believe fundamentally that the right to life in our state is so incredibly sacred and so incredibly sacrosanct that the actions we take here today on what we believe to be the most comprehensive pro-life legislation in the country are critical. They're so critical, we've been working on them since the first day of session. Now, it was not our goal to make this a national bill. National events conspired to do that. All we wanted to do was lay down a marker for ourselves, for our children, and for our grandchildren about the position we took on the issue that we consider most important in our life, that being the right to life. And so today I will go up and I will vote yes on this bill. And that vote will follow me for the rest of my life. And it will be the proudest vote I've ever taken. I hope my colleagues will join me. And I hope they will never forget this moment. Thank you.
Further discussion on Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House Bill 126. Gentleman from Jefferson, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the previous question.
The gentleman from Jefferson has moved that the question upon immediate consideration be now put. Mr. Clerk, those in favor will vote yes. Those opposed will vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 108 yes and 46 no and 1 present, you have moved a previous question. Gentleman from St. Charles, you have 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, amongst the outbursts and my colleague here from the opposite side of the aisle, and one that's leaving us from St. Louis City, they both recognize that I am somebody of my word, and I am somebody that values life from womb to tomb. And that is why something I want to kind of piggyback on the speaker is the criminal justice reforms that we have done in this state to protect the innocent, to protect those that have been reformed. That is another moment of protecting life in this state that is not just for those in the mother's womb. But to close, I do want to indicate that those who are pro-life have long stated this, that they want to be a voice for the voiceless, a voice for the unborn. Today, with the passage of the Missouri Stands for the Unborn Act, I can guarantee you this, that the voice of the unborn in our state will be heard loud and clear. It'll be heard loud and clear in this state, in the nation, and that is why we stand for the Unborn Act.
The gentleman from St. Charles renews his motion that Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute. Sorry, the gentleman from St. Charles renews his motion for the adoption of Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House Bill 126. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Ms. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Ms. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 108 yes and 46 no, you have adopted Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House Bill 126. Gentleman from St. Charles.
I move for the adoption of the emergency clause.
Actually, gentlemen, we need to move for the truly agree.
I truly agree and finally pass. I move that we truly agree and finally pass Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House Bill 126.
The gentleman from St. Charles has moved that Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House Bill 126 be truly agreed and finally passed. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 110 yes and 44 no, you have truly agreed and finally passed Senate substitute for Senate Committee substitute for House Bill 126. Gentleman from St. Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of the emergency clause.
The gentleman from St. Charles move for the adoption of the emergency clause. Gentleman from St. Charles.
I renew my motion.
Discussion on the emergency clause. Gentleman from Clay, for what purpose you rise?
To speak on the emergency clause.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everybody in this body, regardless of your views on this issue, and I know they're strongly held, everybody in this body knows that this bill is an unconstitutional bill as currently interpreted by the Supreme Court of the United States. We all know it. It's the point of the bill, frankly, is for it to be struck down and for it to go to the highest court. So I'd ask the body to vote no on the emergency clause. We don't need to expedite an unconstitutional bill. Before this bill could go into effect anyway, the Supreme Court is going to have to render a decision overturning Roe v. Wade. We all know that. So I'm not sure what the emergency would be, Mr. Speaker. Vote no.
Further discussion. Gentleman from St. Louis County.
To inquire the sponsor.
Does the gentleman from St. Charles yield?
I do.
Proceed.
Hey, good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
So what portions of the bill are affected by the emergency clause?
The emergency clause is on the portion, gentlemen from the Miller District, for the two-parent notification. So for those who are separated, since the Senate had amended that, those who are separated and have been awarded custody, whether it's joint physical or joint legal, this emergency clause will be on that portion alone. So that would require, for those who have been awarded joint legal and joint physical custody, that a written consent would have to be obtained from both parents in order to get an abortion for a minor child.
Okay. Any other provisions that are affected by that?
That is the only prong for the emergency clause.
Okay. And gentlemen, you may or may not have noticed, I was a yes on this bill as we perfected it through the House. I was a no on it just now on third reading and truly agreeing it. And I just wanted to thank the floor leader and the speaker for indulging me for just a second to explain why I switched my vote. I've been pro-life for over 20 years. And gentlemen, I really struggled with this one. I wanted to, as you talked about earlier, include rape and incest exceptions. Originally, we had a really robust discussion about that. And it was the will of the body not to do that at the time. I voted yes anyway. And it was the will of the Senate, I guess, whatever negotiations they went through, also not to include that. And I've filled out Missouri Right to Life surveys time after time saying that if abortion was outlawed, or saying that if Roe v. Wade was overturned, that I would vote to outlaw abortions, but not in the case of the life of the mother and not in the case of rape and incest. And gentlemen, I really respect you. I think you are doing this for the right reasons. I think my colleagues on our side of the aisle are doing this for all the right reasons. But the feedback I've gotten from my constituents, when I've surveyed my constituents year after year, they don't support that. They think this is going too far. Nationally, we've seen a lot of uproar from people who are pro-life, who would vote for more restrictions on abortion, but can't go there. They can't tolerate not saying rape and incest. President Trump, when he was asked about this question in 2015, said, I'm pro-life, but I believe in the 3 traditional exceptions: rape, incest, and life of the mother. So that's why I voted how I voted. Gentlemen, I hope to God that you and my colleagues don't try to castigate me as not pro-life anymore.
Well, gentlemen, I do appreciate the conversation that we had back in February. I think it was, I don't know if it was during a sports game, you and I sat in my office for several hours and discussed that. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that I don't know if it was your intent that you believed that that exception, that you were drafting some legislation, would stop at those hard lines, at the 8, 14, 18, and 20. And I told you that if that was the case, that it would be moot because we already have those exceptions built in. Anybody, for any reason, despite my personal religious, moral beliefs, life begins at conception, those are built in there. And I have an issue, and I believe my colleagues that voted in favor of this have an issue with any exception that would allow a child at 38 weeks, 39 weeks, even 40 weeks to be aborted and to be killed. And that's why I think we support, and I think that this is going to be upheld due to the fact that we have those exceptions built in and unlimited exceptions built in up to 8, 14, 18, and 20.
I hope so. And, you know, with all due respect to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I think they're going to the extreme the other way. When we see what they've done in New York, when we see what the governor of Virginia said, I think our voters, at least my voters in my district, I can't speak for everybody else's, but I think the general sort of attitude of voters, especially in Missouri, where we've reduced the number of abortions year after year after year, we're at an all-time low. We only have one abortion clinic. We have successfully prevented abortions in this state. We are succeeding at protecting life. I just don't know if we need to go further than what we're doing. I don't know how conservative that is, and I worry that it's a little bit of overreach.
Well, gentlemen,
I don't want to go to the other
your
extreme.
support on
The other side, I mean, I think people can distinguish between reasons for having abortions. Abortion on demand, just saying I want one just because, without some sort of compelling reason, to do it as birth control. And I know people will say that doesn't happen, but there are some people who do it for that reason, just because they don't want to. It's not a challenge. It's not going to, you know, they could give it up for adoption. But
well, I hope I earned your support on the underlying amendment with this section because
the emergency clause,
believe,
I think I'm okay with the emergency clause since it's just for that section. But thank you for that clarification.
I appreciate that.
Further discussion, Gentleman from Jefferson.
Speaker, I move the previous question.
The gentleman from Jefferson to move the question under immediate consideration be now put. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board. How they vote? By your vote of 109 yes and 40 no, you move the previous question. Gentleman from St. Charles, you have 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I will renew my motion on the adoption of the emergency clause.
The gentleman from St. Charles renews his motion for the adoption of the emergency clause. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board till they vote. By your vote of 109 yes and 46 no, you approve the emergency clause. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Remaining on that calendar, I ask to recognize the gentleman from Johnson for a motion on Senate Substitute House Committee Substitute House Bill 1088.
Gentleman from Johnson, for what purpose your eyes?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House adopt Senate Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bill 1088.
The gentleman from Johnson move for the adoption of Senate Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bill 1088. Gentleman from Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As people recall, this is the Boondoggle Act. If we have anything that is over $1 million over budget or a year behind, OA has to let us know about it so we can adjust it in the budget. We did a couple of fixes for the Office of Administration. We added in being able to do reverse auctions, which was the gentleman from Texas bill. And for the Secretary of State, we're saving printing about 1 million copies by being able to do things electronically. There's also accepted for electronic payments for state agencies and departments, and a provision dealing with leases and license agreements for higher education. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Discussion on the Senate Substitute. Lady from St. Louis County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire of the bill handler.
Does the gentleman from Johnson yield?
I yield.
Proceed.
All right. So the bill, when it went over to the Senate, it looks like there were a couple of amendments put on that. I was hoping you could explain to us what happened to the original House bill when it went over to the Senate side.
Nothing happened to the original House bill. It stayed fully intact.
Well, my notes show that some Senate amendments were adopted on the floor.
Yeah, the House bill stayed intact. I just went through the Senate amendments. One allows accepted electronic payments for state agencies and departments. That was a gentleman from Jackson put that on. And then the other one is provisions for institution of higher education to clarify language relating to license and lease agreements for development, operation, and maintenance program. And then they had a Senate substitute
We're on the Senate.
for the Secretary of State's office, modifying being able to use electronic versus printing, which will save about 1 million printed copies. It also has the provisions for emergency rules promulgated. There was never any previous thing for their emergency rules, how electronic and emergency rules are filed. And then also the last part of it was office administration, which is the reverse auctions that they're doing or would like to do.
So this idea that OA has this duty to preserve documents, I mean, it makes sense.
And they could do it electronically versus paper copy.
Okay.
Trying to get modern.
Well, I get that. I mean, does that make it harder for things to be sunshine, do you think?
I don't think so, because, you know, in the modern world, if just like if we're sunshine, we're going to print those documents, possibly scan and email them. The last sunshine request I had was asked to be done electronically.
Well, and I don't know enough about, I'm assuming it would be PDF or something like that. So
correct.
Because my concern, I'm a bit old school in that we're required to keep originals, and originals aren't actually the electronic version. So, you know, I'm hoping, trusting technology, that a PDF couldn't be altered in some way. But I think that's the whole point originally of the statute, was that things had to be the original copy of the contract, so that, you know, for transparency reasons, you could see exactly what was agreed to. So did anyone address the ability to manipulate electronic records or anything like that?
Not to be directly.
Okay, all right, very good. Another question I had to do with the idea of competitive purchases, if you will. So current law right now, it says any purchases in excess of $3,000 must be competitively bid. We're taking that up a little bit.
Correct. Sorry, let me grab my piece of paper here. Sorry, that was actually the representative from Green's provision. It had to do with advertising, upping the limit on advertising.
For competitive purchases? Okay, so it had to do with we moved the dollar amount up so that not everything had to be printed in a printed publication.
Correct.
Newspaper? Okay, very good. Thank you for refreshing my memory on that. It seems like we talked about that really early in session. So, and if I remember
so.
right, the Missouri Press Association was okay with that tweak, if I remember right, because it was a modest increase. So, very good. Well, another question I had with the Senate sub that was added had to do with competitive proposals, if you will. So, moving off from competitive purchases as it relates to newspapers, but competitive proposals. You know, you may have, I don't know, do you follow the news in St. Louis County with what all the challenges we're having with our indicted former county executive?
I don't follow them closely. I live on the west side of the state.
I thought so. Sorry about that.
Well, it's God's country over there.
I once lived in Kansas City. I like that side of the state as well. So, so with one of our concerns, and I think all of us as elected officials should be concerned, we're seeing some abuse of people wanting to bid on government business, if you will, and the potential for fraud. And I feel like I'm a little bit anxious about some of this language, only because I feel like our former county executive was able to manipulate the proposal process and the bidding process in order to give political favors to his cronies. And, you know, we're starting to see that. I feel like every day when I open the paper, I'm seeing another example of something where, you know, he was trying to take bribes, give bribes, manipulate the competitive bidding process in order to get something in his donor's favor. So can you try to help put me at ease why we're not making it easier for a corrupt politician to manipulate the process and waste taxpayer money?
Well, I hope that never happens. Unfortunately, it has happened, obviously. And boy, he got by just barely. Sorry. He barely snuck by. Well, the Office of Administration obviously is not an elected official either.
Yeah, but appointed by the governor. I would think if the
Right. I see what you're saying.
If the person in OA is doing something to help pay back some political donors, then that person would be, I would hope, would be removed from Office of Administration quite quickly. So.
The representative from Green just told me we're just keeping up with inflation. The thresholds have been there for years. We're just keeping up with inflation. Correct.
Would you want me to inquire of him instead? I'm
that
happy
might
to do
be
that.
a little easier.
Okay, very good. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, if I could inquire of the other gentleman from Green.
Does the gentleman from Green yield?
I yield.
Proceed.
Thank you. This is a lot easier. I appreciate your you kind of walking me through this.
Certainly, lady.
And I'm sure you heard my inquiry. I mean, maybe I'm just a little bit hypersensitive to this issue right now because of what my constituents are going through with our former county executive. I mean, it's just been really, really challenging to see all of this, an elected official, and in this case, people that were appointed by an elected official doing illegal things in order to benefit donors and other political cronies. So I just want some assurance, if you will, that we're not creating a wider opening for there to be fraud and abuse.
Well, lady, I appreciate that concern. I mean, any kind of misuse of government funds is something that's a concern that I share as well. These are provisions that we've had. I mean, as long as the administration has this kind of discretion, there have been thresholds at which they've not wanted to engage in, like the lengthy, costly process of doing the formal bidding process, because it just doesn't make sense, especially if you're dealing, like I believe is also in this language, with a commodity, something where price is the primary decision point, and so you just look at what prices are offered, and you pick the lowest one. It's not
like
something
would that
really
be
requires
an
a lot of
example,
discretion.
like toilet paper or something like that, where
Right,
it doesn't matter, like it's
or gravel, or who knows, who knows, just something that really like a personal service is not terribly involved. And so these were set in statute a long time ago. As we've had inflation, as the cost of projects has gone up, it's just kind of creeped up to the point now where they're having to do this in instances where it really doesn't make sense to incur the additional expense and time of that process. So this is just designed to kind of bring us back into the intent of the original language, to have these processes in place when you're dealing with a large project or a project where you really need the competitive bids, but not have it in place where you're dealing with something that's really rather minor, routine, and again, like the transparency is still there. Like the records are kept. Like there is oversight at the executive branch of what's going on here. I think the opportunity for any kind of misuse of funds is not increased by this.
Okay. Well, and I'd like to think that is the case with gravel or toilet paper, but what we're seeing in St. Louis County are some every day. I think I can't be any more shocked, and then something else comes out. I just am.
Well, people will always find a way to cheat. I mean, you have to have a trade-off between being able to efficiently operate the processes of government and having those safeguards in place to try to detect waste, fraud, or abuse.
Right.
And if there's a way that we could make this better, that we could more finely calibrate that, I'd be all for it. I think this is the right way to go. Which is why I've been working on this language all session long, and I appreciate the gentleman, bill sponsor, for allowing me to have it on his bill.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then did you also, do you have some information about how we increase the IT purchases as well? Because we were just talking about more basic services like gravel, toilet paper, that kind of thing. It looks like we raised the threshold fairly significantly from $75,000 to $100,000 as it relates to purchasing IT equipment.
Right, lady, because again, you're dealing with the same type of, if you're buying a hard drive, there's not really a personal
Lady, I'm
server.
sorry, your time has expired. Further discussion on Senate Substitute House Committee Substitute House Bill 1088. Seeing none. Gentleman from Johnson, you are recognized to renew your motion.
I renew my motion.
The gentleman from Johnson renews his motion for the adoption of Senate substitute for House Committee substitute for House Bill 1088. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 118 yes and 22 no, you have adopted Senate substitute for House Committee substitute for House Bill 1088. Gentleman from Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Senate substitute for House Committee substitute for House Bill 1088 be truly agreed and finally passed.
The gentleman from Johnson has moved that Senate substitute for House Committee substitute for House Bill 1088 be truly agreed and finally passed. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board, tally the vote. By your vote of 111 yes, 28 no, you have truly agreed and finally passed Senate substitute for House Committee substitute for House Bill 1088. Let all business of the House be suspended while the Speaker signs Senate substitute for Senate Bill 391 to the end of the same may become law. Should there be any objection, please send it forward in writing. Let all business of the House be suspended while the Speaker signs Senate Bill 21 to the end of the same may become law. Should there be any objection, please send it forward in writing. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Remaining on that calendar, I ask you to recognize the gentleman from Caldwell for a motion on Senate Committee substitute, House Committee substitute, House Bill 243.
Gentleman from Caldwell for reference your eyes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House adopt Senate substitute for Senate Committee substitute for House Committee substitute for House Bill 243 and 544. As amended.
The gentleman from Caldwell has moved for the adoption of Senate Committee Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bills 243 and 544. Gentleman from Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a bill we've passed out here twice now over to the Senate, and what it has to do with is allows victims of certain crimes to be released from lease agreements if documentation is provided to the landlord. And the amendments, as amended, it involved legislation that we passed last year that had to do with the non-consensual dissemination of private sexual images. And apparently I wasn't the best English student. There were some grammar mistakes in that bill, and so that's what they added on, was to correct that. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Discussion. Lady from St. Louis County.
To speak in favor of the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am excited that we get to vote on this. I'm glad that it got to the finish line this year. As I understand it, Doc Neely and Senator Arthur worked very hard throughout the years trying to get this legislation together, so I definitely appreciate the gentleman for his hard work. It just so happens to be my first bill as well. It was the very first bill I got to go to committee, so I am excited about it. The support for it was pretty overwhelming, and with all the things that occurred today, I am very glad that we are doing something for women who have been subject, or not just women, but any individual that has been subjected to domestic violence, giving them a path to safety. So I urge the body support on this bill, and I look forward to requesting a signed copy by the governor. Thank you.
Further discussion. Gentleman from St. Louis County, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire the bill sponsor.
Gentleman from Caldwell, yield.
I certainly do.
Proceed.
Hey, gentleman from Caldwell.
Yes, sir.
You've done so much work on this, and as your front seat mate, I'm really grateful to see you get this right here and get it to the governor's desk today. You also worked with, as she mentioned, Senator Arthur.
Correct.
And our departed colleague, Representative Evans, right, also
Correct.
sort of started this when she was here. And did this pass unanimously in the Senate?
Now that I can't give you that information.
I
think it did.
I think it did.
Yes, it did. I was there, as a matter of fact.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, good. I really just wanted to salute you for your work on this. You are really just someone who has a huge heart, and you're going to be helping people in a significant way with the passage of this. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, and I appreciate your efforts.
All right.
Further discussion. Seeing none, gentleman from Caldwell, you recognize close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Gentleman from Caldwell has renewed his motion for the adoption of Senate Committee Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bill Substitutes 243 and 544. All those in favor will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Ms. Clerk, please call the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 139 yes, 3 no, you have adopted Senate Committee Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bills 243 and 544. Gentleman from Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Senate Substitute for Senate Committee Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bill 243 and 544 as amended be truly agreed to and finally passed.
Gentleman from Caldwell has moved for Senate Committee Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bills 243 and 544 as amended be truly agreed and finally passed. All those in favor will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Ms. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 141 yes, 3 no, you have truly agreed and finally passed Senate Committee Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bills 243 and 544. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The next order of business will be messages from the Senate.
Ms. Clerk, please read the messages from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the Senate to inform the House of Representatives that the Senate has taken up and adopted the Conference Committee Report Number 2 on House Committee Substitute, Senate Committee Substitute, Senate Bill 147 as amended, and has taken up and passed Conference Committee Substitute Number 2, House Committee Substitute, Senate Committee Substitute, Senate Bill 147. Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the Senate to inform the House of Representatives that the Senate has taken up and passed Senate Substitute Number 2, Senate Committee Substitute, House Bill 604, with Senate Amendment 1, the EC adopted, in which the concurrence of the House is respectively requested. Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the Senate to inform the House of Representatives that the Senate has taken up and passed Senate Committee Substitute House Bill 355, with Senate Amendment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. In which the concurrence of the House is respectively requested. Respectively, Adrian D. Krause, Secretary of the Senate.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The next order of business will be Senate bills for third reading and formal, and I ask that you recognize the gentleman from St. Louis County for a motion on House Committee Substitute, Senate Committee Substitute, Senate Bill 203.
Gentleman from St. Louis County, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 203 be third read and passed.
Gentleman from St. Louis County has moved that Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 203 be third read and passed. Gentleman from St. Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the House adopt House Committee Substitute for Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 203.
Gentleman from St. Louis has moved that for the adoption of House Committee Substitute for Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 203. Gentleman from St. Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the title, the House Committee Substitute, Senate Committee Substitute, Senate Bill 203 be agreed to.
Gentleman from St. Louis has moved that the title of House Committee Substitute for Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 203 be agreed to. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You have agreed to the title. Gentleman from St. Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a property nuisance bill, and with that I have an amendment ending in .22H, and I move for its adoption.
Gentleman from St. Louis County has moved for the adoption of House Amendment 1. Gentleman from St. Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this essentially keeps this property nuisance bill restricted to the St. Louis City and Kansas City, so it will not apply to a vast majority of the state. What this does, this allows property owners to help mow yards that are deemed abandoned next to them because this adopts Senate Bill 3. It also removes the water utility component, and with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I renew my motion.
Further discussion on House Amendment 1. Lady from St. Louis City, what purpose do you rise?
To inquire of the bill handler.
This gentleman from St. Louis County yield.
I do.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted you to explain a little bit more about this particular amendment and the bill.
Sure. Well, what this does, there are many properties in St. Louis, 25,000 approximately, that are deemed to be abandoned, about 16,000 in Kansas City, and there's a very difficult process in which you can impose or require some sort of remediation by those property owners. This bill allows for that through a judicial process, through proper procedures, notifications, certified mail, and whatnot. So this helps communities better themselves. And as we often drive through cities and towns, we're like, why does it look so bad? Well, this helps address that concern.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Proceed.
Thank you. As a former city alderman, nuisance properties are a huge problem in our inner cities. And I very much support this bill because we will have houses that have sat for 15 years because the process is slow and arduous. So this bill actually is a very good tool for our cities, and I appreciate the sponsor bringing this forward. Thank you.
Further discussion on House Amendment 1. Gentleman from Jefferson, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the previous question.
Gentleman from Jefferson is moved for the previous question. All those in favor will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no. Ms. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Ms. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 90 yes and 32 no, you have moved the previous question. Gentleman from St. Louis County, you have 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion for the adoption of House Amendment 1.
Gentleman from St. Louis County has renewed his motion for the adoption of House Amendment 1. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, no. And the ayes have. You have adopted House Amendment 1. Further discussion. Seeing none, gentleman from St. Louis, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Gentleman from St. Louis County has renewed his motion for the adoption of House Committee Substitute for Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 203 as amended. All those in favor of the adoption of House Committee Substitute, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And the ayes have. You adopted House Committee Substitute. Gentleman from St. Louis County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Gentleman from St. Louis County has renewed his motion for the third reading and passage of House Committee Substitute for Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 203 as amended. All those in favor will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no. Ms. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 136 yes and 6 no, you have third read and passed. House Committee Substitute, Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 203 as amended. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Remaining on that calendar, I ask that you recognize the gentleman from Jackson for a motion on House Committee Substitute Senate Bill 333.
Gentleman from Jackson, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Senate Bill 333 be read and third time and passed.
Gentleman from Jackson has moved that Senate Bill 333 be third read and passed. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move tongue-in-cheek for the adoption of House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 333.
The gentleman from Jackson has moved tongue-in-cheek that for the adoption of House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 333. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the title House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 333 be agreed to.
Gentleman from Jackson has moved that the title of House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 333 be agreed to. Any discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing none. Gentleman from Jackson, do you have any discussion?
I just want to make sure everybody understands this is tongue-in-cheek, so this is a no vote.
I'm glad you made that abundantly clear. Any further discussion on the titling of House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 333? Gentleman from St. Charles.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to make the body know, I keep getting some questions on this with the Capitol Police bill being on there. I just want the body to know I am aware of what we are doing on this one, and it has been agreed to. Thank you.
Further discussion on the title. Gentleman from Jackson.
I want to clarify that it's yes on the title, no on everything else.
I'm glad you made that abundantly clear. Further discussion on the titling of House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 333. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You have agreed to the title. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now I move tongue-in-cheek for the adoption of House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 333.
Further discussion. Gentleman from St. Louis City.
To inquire the bill handler.
Gentleman from Jackson, yield.
I do.
Proceed.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think I am agreeing with wanting to roll this all back.
Yes, I'm not sure if I agree with myself on all this, but
I just wanted to double check what all is in this that's being rolled back.
we're rolling back to the original Senate bill, which is 2 pages, which allows the city of Kansas City to go for a vote for tax for the Kansas City Fire Department. It'll allow them to put that on the ballot.
Okay.
It's pretty simple.
Do you know what any of the more controversial pieces were that were added?
It went from 2 pages to 78 pages.
78 pages. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm looking at some of these. Any of them in particular that you know were problems, though?
No, we're at the point in time where this is the way we get this across the line.
Looks like a lot of drug laws. Okay, well, gentlemen, I'll be supporting opposing the House Committee sub so we can roll this back.
No on the, yes, on tongue-in-cheek.
Thank you.
Further discussion. Gentleman from Jackson, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I inquire of the gentleman from Jackson?
Does the gentleman from Jackson yield?
Yes.
Proceed.
Kind gentlemen, this is one of those rare times I'm actually going to support something you're doing on the floor when you're saying please vote no, which is incredibly rare.